This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to get into, well, maybe the oldest partnership in human history. I'm talking about us and our dogs.
It's a relationship that goes back so far, and it really seems like one of those settled topics, We all know dogs were the first animal we ever domesticated, happened way before agriculture, before we even built towns.
Exactly. And when you look at dogs today, the sheer diversity is just staggering. You've got these tiny 6-pound poodles and then these massive 150-pound St. Bernards.
And they're all the same species. It's really nature's most physically diverse creation.
Right. And the story we've all been told is that this huge variation, the floppy ears, the pushed-in faces, all of it, that's all down to us. Specifically, it was the Victorians, right, in the 19th century, with their intense selective breeding programs.
That's the common narrative. And, it's not totally wrong for some of the really extreme breeds we see today. But it turns out that story is, well, it's fundamentally incomplete.
And that's what we're here to unpack. We're doing a deep dive into some new research, some really groundbreaking studies that completely reframe this whole timeline.
Yeah, we're looking at morphology from Evan and her team, and then some deep genetics from Zhang and others. And what they found suggests that this incredible diversity, it's ancient.
Not just decades or centuries ancient, but millennia. That dog populations were already wildly diverse thousands of years before the first Victorian Kennel Club ever existed. So this is a big, complex story. It's biology, it's culture, archaeology. We have to pull it all together.
Let's start with the timeline, because honestly, that's where all the confusion really begins. The actual process of dog domestication is, believe it or not, still one of the most hotly debated topics in science.
Really? I thought that was all figured out. Wolf becomes dog. The end.
Not even close. The consensus now is that it probably wasn't a single event. It likely happened multiple times in different places from some kind of extinct ancestor that wolves and dogs both share.
Okay, so it's messy. And I guess the timing is part of that mess.
It's the biggest part. If you look at the genetics, the ancient DNA evidence, it points pretty strongly to the first true domestic dogs appearing around, say, 11,000 years ago.
11,000. Okay, that feels about right. After the last ice age.
But then you have the archaeologists.
Yeah.
And they keep finding things that push that date way back.
How far back are we talking?
Some claims go as far as 33,000 years ago.
Wait, 33,000? Neanderthals were still around then. Are they really saying people had dogs that long ago?
That's the claim, and that's the tension. You have these canid remains, say, in Altai, Siberia, and they're found with human artifacts. So researchers suggest they could be early dogs. And that creates this massive 22,000-year gap between the bones and the genes.
So why is it so hard to just get a straight answer? Why the huge gap?
Two big reasons. The first is preservation. These ancient bones are often just fragments. They're in terrible shape.
So you can't just carbon-14 date the bone itself.
Oftentimes, no. It's too degraded, so you have to date something nearby, like charcoal from a fire, and that introduces a huge margin of error. You get a ballpark, not a precise date.
Okay, so dating is a problem. What's the second challenge?
The second challenge is that early dogs looked almost exactly like wolves. Domestication isn't like flipping a switch. It's a slow, gradual process. So the very first dogs would have been, just slightly different from their wild cousins.
So you can't just look at a skull and say, yep, that's a dog.
Not for the really ancient ones, no. It relies on super careful measurements, morphometrics, and just hoping you find it clearly buried in a human camp.
But the science is getting better, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned we have a site that's been confirmed with both methods.
We do. The Mesolithic site of Verite in northwest Russia. The specimens there are consistently dated to about 10,800 to 11,000 years ago. And they've been identified as dogs both by their DNA and by their physical shape. So that 11,000 year mark, it keeps coming up. It seems to be the point where the dog really becomes a dog.
And this is where the new tools come in and change everything. Let's talk about the method Evan's team used, this three-dimensional morphometrics. What is that?
Right. It sounds super technical, but the concept is pretty simple. Old school methods would use calipers to measure, the length of a skull or the width.
Just simple lines.
Exactly. But that doesn't capture the whole picture. the subtle curves, the geometry of the face. So with 3D morphometrics, they use laser scanners or photogrammetry to create these incredibly detailed digital models of hundreds of skulls.
Wow. So they're analyzing the entire complex shape of the skull, not just 2 or 3 measurements.
Precisely. And they had a huge sample size, over 600 canid skulls from the last 50,000 years. And this powerful technique allowed them to finally define, in a quantifiable way, what makes a dog skull different from a wolf skull.
And what did they find? What is that key
It
difference?
came down to two main things: a shortened snout and a widened face compared to wolves. That combination is the physical hallmark of domestication in dogs.
Okay, a shorter, wider face.
Yeah.
And that first appears when?
Around 11,000 years ago. It lines up perfectly with the genetic data. And here's the kicker. When they went back and analyzed those older, more controversial specimens,
The ones from 33,000 years ago.
yeah, like the one from Goyet in Belgium, they analyzed 17 of these ancient specimens, and not a single one showed that distinctive dog morphology. They were all, morphologically speaking, wolves.
So those ancient canids might have been hanging around humans, maybe even interacting with them, but their bodies hadn't started to change yet. The physical transformation happens at that 11,000-year mark.
That's what the evidence points to. That's when the wolf form truly starts to shift into the dog form.
Okay, so now we get to the really big finding, the thing that turns that whole Victorian narrative on its head. Once this dog shape appears 11,000 years ago, what did they find?
An absolute explosion of diversity. I mean, right away. The dogs from the early Holocene, so starting about 11,700 years ago, they showed this incredible variety in skull shapes and sizes. You find them with hunter-gatherers, you find them with the first farmers, and they're not all the same.
How much variety are we talking about here? How does it compare to today?
This is the stunning part. That early variety captured more than half, something like 52 or 53% of the total morphological diversity you see in all modern dog breeds.
Wait, stop. Did you say more than half?
More than half.
So half of all the dog shapes we know today, from the long snout of a collie to the broad head of a mastiff, the blueprints for those were already present 10,000 years ago.
That's exactly right. The building blocks were already on the table.
That completely changes the story. So what does that leave for the Victorians? What did they actually do?
They didn't invent diversity, they invented extremism. They took traits that were already there and pushed them to the absolute limit through intense selection. The study is very clear on this.
Can you give an example of that extremism?
Yeah, the classic one is the brachycephalic breeds. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Brachycephalic, that means short-headed, right? Like pugs, bulldogs.
Exactly, those super flat, short-faced skulls. That morphology is completely absent in the archaeological record. You don't find ancient pugs. That level of physical engineering, that extreme compression of the face, it takes intense modern human pressure. That's a Victorian innovation.
So the ancient dogs were diverse, but they were still functional, still robust dogs.
Right. The ancient variety was wide, but it was functional. The Victorian variety was also wide, but it often pushed things into dysfunctional territory for the sake of a look. It's a huge distinction.
Okay, so let's shift from the bones to the people. Because these dogs didn't just appear, they were moving around with humans. This brings us to the second study from Zhang's team, which looked at ancient dog genomes.
Yes, this moves us from the what to the who and the how. They sequenced 17 ancient dog genomes from East and Central Asia. And what they found was fascinating. The dog ancestries tracked almost perfectly with human populations.
So if a group of humans had a specific genetic signature, their dogs did too.
Very closely, yeah. When a human group moved, they took their dogs with them. The dogs became these living, breathing markers of human migration.
Is there a clear example of that? A dog lineage we can trace?
Oh yeah, a great one is the Arctic dog ancestry, the ancestors of modern huskies and sled dogs. You can see that genetic line spread right alongside people moving out of northeastern Siberia and across the Arctic. The people and their dogs, they moved as a unit. They shared a history.
But it wasn't always just people moving with their own dogs. The study also found evidence of trade.
It did, and this is really interesting. In some places, they found a total mismatch between the local human DNA and the dog DNA.
Meaning the dogs came from somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. It strongly suggests there was an early trade network for dogs that had specific useful skills. People were actively seeking out and trading for better dogs.
And what kind of dogs were valuable enough to be traded over long distances?
Surprisingly, it was those Arctic dogs again. They were showing up thousands of miles away from the Arctic. They were found with bronze working people in southern China. I mean, think about that. A sled dog ancestor in subtropical China.
Wow. So they must have been valued for something other than pulling a sled in the snow.
For sure. Maybe for strength, for guarding, for hauling goods. A powerful dog would have been an indispensable piece of technology, an economic tool worth trading for. It reframes the dog as, critical infrastructure.
So if we tie this back to that initial explosion of diversity, what was driving it? Why so many different dogs so early?
The sources point to two main ideas working together. First is just early human selection. Even 11,000 years ago, different groups of people had different needs. You might need a fast dog for hunting small game, or a big, tough dog for guarding your camp, so people were likely already selecting for different traits.
Makes sense. And the other idea
Is external factors, climate, geography, what kind of food was available. A dog living on the coast might evolve differently than one in a dense forest, but maybe the most important factor was the raw material they had to work with, the wolf itself.
right. How diverse were the wolves back then?
This was another huge finding from the 3D analysis. Pleistocene wolves, the ones that became dogs, were way more diverse than modern wolves. Specifically, 26.4% more diverse, morphologically.
So the wolves we have today are just a fraction of what used to exist.
A tiny fraction. That ancient gene pool was massive and rich. So when humans started the domestication process, they weren't starting with a uniform template. They had this incredible palette of shapes and sizes to draw from right from the get-go.
And it seems like this process wasn't always a straight line, because not every dog fits this pattern of intense human selection.
And that's where you get cases like the dingo in Australia. Dingoes are a fantastic counterexample. They challenge this whole idea that domestication is just about humans taking complete control. For one, they can't really digest starch.
Oh, right. So they can't live on the agricultural leftovers we feed most of our dogs.
Correct. Which suggests their journey split off very early, and their relationship with people is, well, it's fluid. Sometimes they're companions, sometimes they're semi-feral scavengers. It suggests a much less intense, less controlling form of human influence.
So domestication is really a spectrum. It's not just wolf to poodle. Where does that leave us? We've got the 11,000-year mark. Pretty solid, but what about those really, really old claims?
The very first stages, back in the late Pleistocene, are still pretty much a black box. The cranial record, the skulls are just too rare and too fragmented, and the skulls of the very first dogs were probably so wolf-like that we couldn't tell the difference with our current methods anyway.
So if skulls aren't the answer for that earliest period, where does the research go from here?
The focus has to shift. We need to look at other parts of the skeleton, things like jawbones and teeth, which are found more often. They might show earlier, more subtle changes. But ultimately, the future is in combining the biomolecular data, the DNA, with something called archaeophonomic studies.
Okay, let's break that down. Archaeophonomics.
It's basically linking the genes to the physical traits. You study the ancient DNA to find the gene that, say, shortens the snout, and then you look for the subtle evidence of that physical change in the bones. It's about seeing the cause and effect written in the ancient record.
What an incredible shift in our understanding. We've gone from thinking dog diversity is this modern Victorian invention to seeing it as this deep, ancient biocultural process that started the moment domestication began.
It really does recontextualize our entire history with them. It wasn't one event. It's been a continuous dance between their biology, our culture, and the environment for over 10,000 years.
And as we wrap up, there's a fascinating loose end. Some modern dogs, like German Shepherds, Tibetan Mastiffs, even some hounds, their skulls still have that wolf-like shape.
They do. Morphologically, they're quite similar to those very early canids that are so hard to classify.
Which really highlights the problem, doesn't it? If we have modern animals we definitely call dogs, but they still have that ancient skull shape, how can we be so sure that a 33,000-year-old wolf-like skull found near a human camp wasn't an extremely early dog?
It's the question that remains. The ambiguity is built right into their history.
And that leaves a final question for you, the listener, to think about. If dogs are our oldest friends, are they all really products of our intense engineering? Or does that ancient wild wolf legacy still show up, physically, in the friends sitting at our feet today? Maybe take a closer look at the history of a specific breed like the dingo or maybe the Yesuitzquintal and see if you can trace that wild legacy for yourself.
There's always something more to find when you dig deep.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.